Alright, y'all, so let's get into this breakdown of Mark chapter 14. The chapter context: Jesus has finished his public teaching ministry and now prepares for the crucifixion. His sacrificial loyalty will provide the means by which the disciples' abandonment will be forgiven. Next, the Romans, as representatives of Gentiles throughout history, will join the Jews and kill Jesus. Jesus will be buried and he will rise again, with the promise that his sacrifice will redeem the world. Matthew 26, Luke 22 follow Mark 14 more closely, while John chapter 13 verse 1 through chapter 18 verse 27 records more of Jesus' teaching in the upper room. So let's get into this breakdown. Part 1. Okay, just keep scrolling. Okay, the final chapter before Jesus' crucifixion start with Mark's characteristic sandwich stories, which devolve to pure tragedy. While Jewish leaders and Judas prepare for his betrayal, Jesus concentrates still on teaching the disciples the truth about themselves, and what the Jewish Messiah really is. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and chief priests and elders have joined together to destroy Jesus. Their main setback in the crowd, Mark 14, 1 through 2. Jesus just spent a week humiliating the Jewish religious leaders and winning the hearts of people, Mark 11, 12. He must be arrested when he's relatively unprotected, or the crowd may riot, Mark 14, 1 through 2. For at least the second time, possibly the third, Luke 7, 36 through 50, and then John 12, 1 through 8. A woman anoints Jesus with her perfume at the home of Simon the leper. An unidentified woman anoints Jesus' head on the day of the Passover. Lambs are being anointed, Mark 14, 3 through 9. Jesus prays her gracious act of worship that prepares him for his burial the next afternoon. The moon turns dark again as Judas approaches the chief priests, offering to betray Jesus to them, Mark 14, 10 through 11. If the Jewish leaders need to prevent a riot, they'll have to arrest Jesus at night, away from the crowds, when it's hard to see and there are few witnesses. Y'all, they spit on that man's face, on Jesus' face. Like, okay. Judas will tell them when and where. It's possible that Judas has become disillusioned with Jesus' refusal to become a military or political Messiah, leading him to actively look for a profitable way out of the situation. 30 funky pieces of silver. Mark describes the Passover meal with the disciples, Mark 14, 12 through 21, while John goes into greater detail about what Jesus taught them, John 13 through 17. In Egypt, the blood of lambs protected the Israelites from death, Exodus 12. As Jesus prepares to share his own blood to bring life to the world, he dismisses Judah to set the stage, John 13, 21 through 30. And transform that Passover meal into the Lord's Supper, Mark 14, 22 through 25. After their meal, Jesus and the disciples go to the garden on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus prophesies their abandonment of him, Mark 14, 26 through 31. The disciples will scatter, and Peter will deny even know Jesus. Jesus separates from most of the disciples and tells Peter, James, and John to pray that they will be strong in the face of temptation. Jesus walks further and collapses before his Father in a tortured prayer, simultaneously asking to forego the cross and submitting to his will, God's will. The three disciples are asleep and are not prepared for what comes next, Mark 14, 32 through 42. And Judas returns, leading a crowd of guards and servants to arrest Jesus. You know what I can't get over? Not only the 30 funky pieces of silver, like he was like, I'm going to give a kiss to the one that you need to get. Like, you kissed that man and betrayed. Okay. Where was I at? Judas returns, leading a crowd of guards and servants to arrest Jesus, Mark 14, 43 through 50. Judas approaches Jesus with a kiss to identify him. In the dark and chaos, Peter slices off the ear of a servant. John 18:10. But Jesus heals the man. Luke 22:51. That's not funny, but it tickled me for a second, and it goes peacefully. The disciples scatter as he said they would. Of all four Gospels, only Mark mentions that a young man also flees. Mark 14:51-52. The guards try to grab him, but he escapes into the night, leaving behind the linen wrap that served as his only clothing. Oh Lord, he was naked. Mark combines Jesus' trial before Annas, a former high priest, and Caiaphas, the current high priest. John 18:12-13. Members of the Sanhedrin gather all the witnesses they can find to uncover a crime they can charge Jesus with. Mark 14:53-65. Even though the witnesses lie, the Sheridan cannot find two identical testimonies required for a capital offense. Jesus provides no defense. Isaiah 53:7. Finally, the high priest asks Jesus directly who he is, and Jesus responds. The council members immediately convict him of blasphemy. While Jesus is questioned and beaten, Peter remains near the guards and servants, warming themselves by fire. Mark 14:66-72. Peter is a follower of the man who is arrested and assaulted a servant. He assaulted a servant who is the friend and relation of men around him. John 18:10. In his fear, Peter forgets his vow to die for Jesus and instead denies that he ever knew him. Mark 14:29-31. Jesus spends the days before his crucifixion as he spent the previous 3 years trying to get the disciples to understand the bigger picture of the Jewish Messiah's role in God's plan for the world. Where other Gospels, especially John, go into more detail, Mark touches on just a few themes that will prepare them for establishing the church, recognizing and honoring God's work. Mark 14:3-9. Recognizing the enemy, but don't fear him. Mark 14:1-2, and then 10-11, 17-21, 43-50, and then 53-65. Value community and communally remember Jesus' work. Mark 14:12-16, and then 22-25. Lean on God's power and not your own. Remain faithful to him. Mark 26-31, 66-72, and understand that God is a Father deserving our honesty, our trust, and our obedience. Mark 14:32-42. So I'm probably not going to get to the next part within a minute's time, so I'll come back for part 2.